Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Imagine for a second that you're an archaeologist.
Okay.
You're in Europe, painstakingly excavating the ruins of this 900-year-old medieval stone castle.
Right. Brushing off the dirt, mapping the walls.
Exactly. You're mapping out where the archers used to stand to fend off sieges, and then your shovel hits something that is definitely not a 12th century stone.
I'm guessing it's not gold either.
No, it's cold, heavy steel. So you dig a little further, and you realize you haven't just found a castle cellar. You have unearthed a fully intact, incredibly secretive 1960s Cold War nuclear bunker.
Wow.
Yeah, built directly underneath the medieval ruins.
I mean, it sounds like the premise for a science fiction thriller, honestly.
Right.
But that exact scenario just unfolded. It's one of the most striking archaeological juxtapositions I can recall reading about in recent years.
It just completely stopped me in my tracks when I saw the reports because, it really forces you to think about human nature.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, a medieval castle is the ultimate physical expression of defense against a localized threat. Right? An invading army with catapults and swords.
Sure, you want the high ground.
Exactly. But by the 1960s, the threat had completely morphed into nuclear annihilation. Literally a poison from the sky.
Right.
Yet the geographical instinct didn't change at all. We sought the exact same high ground, the exact same fortified position, and then we just dug deeper.
We buried our modern doomsday anxieties literally inside the footprint of our ancient ones.
Yes, that's exactly it.
It is a profound psychological layering because, both the castle builders and the bunker engineers were engaged in the exact same fundamental human behavior.
Which is what?
Well, when faced with an existential threat, we build walls and we hide. That's what we do. And the deep irony, of course, is that the high-tech Cold War bunker was eventually forgotten.
Just buried by time.
Completely fading into the archaeological record, just like the medieval stones above it. It's a stark reminder that our anxieties and, the empires that built monuments to them, they're all temporary.
That realization that our most advanced, complex systems are often just new layers built over the same old fundamental human challenges. That is the energy we are bringing to today's deep dive.
It's great framing.
Thanks. We're looking at a stack of incredibly diverse journalistic reports, scientific dispatches, and global news updates today.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We're going to take you on a journey from the farthest edges of the cosmos, where dark energy is literally tearing the universe apart, straight down into the dirt of the Earth, where we're trying to mine ancient rocks to save our climate.
And then we'll be navigating the surreal, often absurd frontier of artificial intelligence.
Which is getting weirder by the day.
It really is. And we will unpack the complex, overlapping geopolitical conflicts that are quietly rewriting the global economy right under our noses.
And as we move through these wildly different spheres, from astrophysics to global supply chains, the through line is going to be friction.
Yeah.
We are building these magnificent tools to look outward and engineer our future, but we are constantly running headfirst into the messy, unpredictable biological and political realities right here at home on planet Earth.
The human element always gets in the way.
It really does. So let's start by looking outward. And I mean as far out as physically possible.
Okay, let's do it.
I want to talk about the macro structure of the universe itself, because we just got a new map, and it is a map of something we can't even see.
The DI's eye map.
Right, the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument, or DDS. They've just wrapped up a massive 5-year mission.
And the results are wild.
They really are. What they have produced is the most comprehensive, high-resolution, three-dimensional map of the universe ever created. I'm talking about cataloging over 40 million galaxies and distant quasars.
It's a monumental achievement in astrophysics. I mean, truly. But to understand why this specific map is so revolutionary, we have to look at what they were actually measuring.
Okay, lay it on me.
They weren't just charting coordinates so we know where to point our telescopes. They were tracing the cosmic web to understand dark energy.
Right, dark energy. Let me throw an analogy at you and tell me if I'm conceptualizing this correctly.
Go for it.
Imagine you are standing in the center of a pitch-black, infinitely large mansion.
Okay.
You turn on a flashlight and the beam hits the walls. But you suddenly realize that the walls aren't just standing there in the dark. They are actively accelerating away from you at terrifying speeds.
Spooky, but okay.
And there's some invisible mechanism, like some phantom machinery inside the walls, pushing them outward. That invisible machinery is dark energy.
That is actually a phenomenal way to visualize it. Because dark energy makes up roughly 68% of the universe.
Yeah.
Yet it interacts with absolutely nothing that we can directly detect.
It's just invisible.
Completely. It doesn't emit light. It doesn't block light. It just exerts this massive repulsive pressure on the fabric of space-time itself.
So how do you measure it?
Well, how do you measure something you can't see or touch? You measure the things it is pushing.
The walls of the mansion.
Exactly. And that is where the DSI map comes in. It utilizes something called baryon acoustic oscillations.
Okay, baryon acoustic oscillations. That sounds incredibly dense. Break down the mechanics of that for me. Like, how does an oscillation help us map dark energy?
Think of baryon acoustic oscillations, or BAOs, like ripples frozen in a pond.
Okay.
In the very early infant universe, everything was an incredibly hot, dense soup of particles. Sound waves, actual acoustic pressure waves, rippled through this superheated plasma.
The sound waves in space.
Space wasn't empty then. It was a dense plasma. As the universe expanded and rapidly cooled down, that plasma turned into normal gas, and those sound waves essentially froze in place. They just stopped moving.
So they left a physical imprint on the universe.
Exactly. Those frozen ripples created regions where matter was slightly more densely packed together. Over billions of years, gravity pulled more matter into those denser regions, and that is where galaxies eventually formed.
Ah, I see.
And because these ripples all had a very specific, uniform size when they froze, they act like a cosmic yardstick.
So it gives us a fixed measurement to work with.
Yes. By looking at how the distance between these galaxy clusters has stretched over time, astrophysicists can calculate exactly how fast the universe was expanding at different points in its history.
Oh, wow. So DSE isn't just looking at where the galaxies are right now. By looking deeper and deeper into space, which is literally looking further back in time, they are measuring how much that yardstick has been stretched out by dark energy over billions of years.
That is the crux of the mission. The data from DC is giving us the precise historical timeline of the universe's expansion.
And the implications.
Staggering. If dark energy is a constant force, the universe will just expand forever until all the stars burn out and everything freezes.
The big freeze.
Right. But if the DSI data shows that dark energy is getting stronger over time, it could eventually overpower gravity entirely, ripping galaxies, stars, and eventually individual atoms apart in what physicists call the Big Rip.
That is a deeply existential map.
It really is.
But what strikes me as fascinating is that even as we use these incredible instruments to map the grand macro-scale fate of the universe, the individual objects inside that universe are still totally breaking our fundamental math.
Oh, constantly.
Because right alongside the DSI findings, we have new observations from the JWST, the James Webb Space Telescope.
The exoplanet.
Yes. They've spotted a supergent exoplanet called 29 Cygni b, and from what the astronomical reports are saying, this planet shouldn't exist. It completely defies our understanding of planetary formation.
It's a recurring, humbling theme in astronomy. You build a better tool, and the universe instantly proves your textbook's inadequate.
Every single time.
To understand why 29 Cygni b is such a problem for astrophysicists, we really need to look at the traditional model of how planets are born, which is called the core accretion model.
Okay. My understanding of core accretion is basically that it's like a cosmic snowball effect.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You have a young star surrounded by a spinning disk of dust and gas. Little pebbles of dust crash into each other, they stick together, they get bigger and bigger, generating more gravity, until they pull in enough gas to become a giant planet like Jupiter. Is that roughly it?
That is the standard model, yes.
Yeah.
And it works beautifully for a lot of the solar systems we observe. It explains a slow, methodical buildup of mass over millions of years.
But not for this new one.
No, 29 Cygni b is incredibly massive, and it sits at an extreme distance from its host star. If you apply the core accretion snowball model, there simply shouldn't be enough dense material out at that distance to build a planet of that size.
The snowball would run out of snow.
Exactly, and certainly not within the timeline of that star system's life. The math simply does not balance.
So how did it get there? I mean, did it skip the snowball phase entirely?
That is the leading alternative theory right now, known as disk instability.
Disk instability.
Yeah. In this model, you don't build a planet pebble by pebble. Instead, a massive chunk of that swirling disk of gas and dust becomes gravitationally unstable and just collapses in on itself violently.
Wow.
It forms a massive planet almost instantaneously, at least in cosmic terms. Finding 29 Cygni b suggests that this violent, rapid collapse model might be far more common in the universe than we previously thought.
So we have to rewrite the rules.
Again, it forces us to rethink how heavy, complex structures assemble themselves in the dark.
It is wild to think that we can map the ripples of the Big Bang, but we still don't fully understand how a gas giant forms right in our own stellar neighborhood.
A big universe.
And speaking of our neighborhood, we actually have a visitor from outside of it that is currently blowing astronomers' minds.
The interstellar comet.
Yes. The European Space Agency, the ESA, has a probe out there called the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, or JUICE. And JUICE recently turned its sensors toward a comet named 3ILS.
Catchy name.
Right. Now, this isn't a normal comet. It's an interstellar invader. It originated entirely outside of our solar system and is just passing through.
Catching an interstellar object is exceptionally rare.
I can imagine.
And what Juicy found is that as 3ILS gets closer to our sun, it is actively outgassing, spraying massive amounts of water into space. The current estimates suggest it is venting enough water to fill 70 Olympic swimming pools every single day.
That is a literal fire hose of cosmic water. But here's the question that jumps out at me. If this comet came from a completely alien star system, light years away, how do we know the water it is spraying is anything like the water we have in our oceans here on Earth?
That is precisely the mystery the JUICE mission is trying to unravel, and it all comes down to isotopic signatures.
Okay, chemistry time.
Water is H2O, 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. But not all hydrogen is created equal. There is standard hydrogen, and then there's a heavier isotope called deuterium.
Deuterium.
Right, which contains an extra neutron. The specific ratio of standard hydrogen to deuterium in a body of water acts like a chemical fingerprint.
Oh, that is fascinating. So the water in Earth's oceans has a very specific deuterium fingerprint.
Exactly. We know the exact isotopic ratio of Earth's water. By using mass spectrometers on the JICE probe to analyze the vapor spraying off this interstellar comet, scientists can determine its specific deuterium fingerprint.
And if they match?
If the ratio on 3IATLs matches or even closely resembles the water on Earth, it provides massive structural support to a very bold theory.
That we got our water from space.
Yes, that the water on our planet and potentially the organic building blocks required for life weren't just baked into the Earth when it formed. They might have been delivered by interstellar comets bombarding the planet billions of years ago.
Wait, so you're saying the water sitting in the glass on my desk right now could share a chemical lineage with ice that froze around a completely different star?
It is highly probable. It shrinks the scale of the cosmos down to an incredibly intimate level.
That is mind-blowing.
It implies that the ingredients for life are not isolated anomalies, but are standard, highly mobile commodities being traded across interstellar space.
The idea of the universe as an active trading economy is a great pivot point, because humanity is currently doing everything in our power to join that economy.
Oh, absolutely.
We are rapidly moving out of the era where space is just a place we look at through telescopes, and we are entering the era of heavy space industrialization.
That's a gold rush up there.
The dispatches we have today are just overflowing with rapid developments. Let me run through a few of these because the sheer volume of activity is staggering. NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, is deep into preparations for the Artemis II mission.
Returning humans to lunar orbit.
Exactly. And the engineering reports highlight people like Rebecca Tolatovich, a mechanical technician lead at the Kennedy Space Center, who is literally turning wrenches on the Orion spacecraft as we speak.
And alongside the engineering, you have these profound moments of human perspective.
Like the new moon photo.
Yes. There was a recent stunning photograph released from the lunar orbiter titled At the Edge of Light. It captures the moon's Orientale basin right along the terminator line, that sharp boundary where the lunar day drops off into absolute night.
It looks so hostile.
It is a visual reminder of the harsh, rugged geography we are actively trying to conquer.
Right. And it's not just government agencies anymore. The private sector is moving at a breakneck pace. SpaceX just completed a successful static hire of the upper stage of their version 3 Starship for an upcoming test flight.
Getting ready for May, yeah.
And you have a company called Max Space that just unveiled a subscale prototype of an expandable lunar habitat. They are literally marketing it as scalable real estate for the moon.
Space real estate.
Yeah. And low Earth orbit is getting incredibly crowded. NASA just launched 6 new CubeSats via a Northrop Grumman commercial resupply mission.
The CRS-24 mission.
Right. And they've already selected Voyager Technologies to run a 7th fully private mission to the International Space Station, targeting 2028. We are building infrastructure at a ferocious speed.
We are. But this massive industrialization brings a harsh reality with it. You cannot have logistics, commercial real estate, and rapid manufacturing without inevitably generating an immense amount of waste.
Oh, the trash problem.
And in orbit, waste is not just an eyesore. It is an existential threat.
You were talking about the Kessler syndrome, right?
Yes.
The idea that we leave so much trash up there, dead satellites, spent rocket boosters, that one collision creates a cloud of shrapnel, which hits more satellites, creating more shrapnel, until low Earth orbit is just a blender of hypervelocity metal that traps us on Earth forever.
That is the exact mechanism. When objects are moving at 17,000 miles per hour, a paint fleck hits with the force of a bowling ball.
A paint fleck.
Seriously. So a dead satellite collision hits like a tactical missile. For decades, our approach to space was just to launch things, use them until they broke, and leave them there.
Like a giant landfill.
We treated orbit like an infinite landfill.
Okay.
But the reports you mentioned show that the space industry is finally acknowledging the crisis. We are seeing the birth of the orbital sanitation and towing industry.
Yes, the solutions being developed are incredible. Japan has a company called Astroscale that is launching a private mission in 2027 specifically designed to approach and inspect 2 dead satellites in orbit.
They're going up to look at the trash.
Right. And the Chinese Space Agency just conducted a massive test with their Qingzhou robotic cargo spacecraft. They successfully demonstrated the ability to capture and physically tow non-cooperative space debris out of its orbit.
The term non-cooperative is key there.
What does that actually mean in space?
It means the piece of trash is tumbling chaotically.
Right.
It doesn't have handles or docking ports. Capturing a tumbling, bus-sized object traveling at orbital velocity requires incredibly advanced autonomous robotics and precise thruster control.
And what I found so delightfully bizarre about that Chinese Qingzhou mission is that while it was testing this high-stakes robotic towing maneuver, the spacecraft was simultaneously running automated tests on moss cultivation and metal production in microgravity.
Yeah.
They are towing garbage, growing plants, and smelting metal all on the same robotic platform.
It really is the ultimate display of multitasking. But it speaks to the broader paradigm shift. If you are going to establish a permanent presence on the Moon or Mars, you cannot afford to ship every single replacement part from Earth.
You go broke.
Right, you have to learn how to refine materials, grow biological ecosystems, and recycle dead infrastructure locally. Astroscale and the Qingzhou craft prove that we are no longer just explorers. We are becoming custodians and manufacturers of the orbital environment.
We are building heavy industry in a vacuum. But here is the thematic pivot. While we are designing expandable Kevlar habitats for the Moon and towing garbage in orbit, archaeologists are still unearthing massive, world-altering infrastructure right here on Earth that we simply forgot about.
It's amazing what's under our feet.
It really shows how infrastructure shapes empires, both past and future. We started with that incredible Cold War bunker under the medieval castle, but that is just the tip of the archaeological iceberg this week. Look at the discovery they just made in Germany.
The Roman Canal.
Yes, archaeologists excavating near the Rhine River unearthed an ancient Roman canal. But this wasn't some little drainage ditch. This canal was 50 feet wide, incredibly straight, and clearly designed to connect massive Roman military forts in the region.
50 feet wide is an absolute marvel of ancient hydroengineering.
Yeah.
We often fixate on the famous Roman roads, the cobblestone highways that connected the empire.
Oh, sure, all roads lead to Rome.
Exactly. But water transport was exponentially more efficient for moving heavy freight.
So this wasn't just for moving a few troops in rowboats. This was heavy logistics.
Precisely. If you consider the sheer tonnage of grain, timber, stone, and military armaments required to sustain massive garrisons on the frontier of the Roman Empire, doing that over land with ox carts is painfully slow and expensive.
So they built a water highway.
A 50-foot wide canal functions as a socio-economic superhighway. It allows massive barges to move critical supply lines fluidly. What is truly compelling about this discovery is how completely the modern landscape had swallowed it.
Yeah, it just buried it.
The centuries of forest growth, the farming, the modern German towns, they had completely concealed this massive framework. We drive our cars and build our modern supply chains directly on top of the invisible buried ghosts of ancient global economies.
It makes you wonder how many of our modern highways will be buried under forests 1,000 years from now.
Probably most of them.
But it's not just the physical dirt we are digging into. We are digging into the genetic history of these ancient people, and we are finding that our assumptions about them were totally wrong.
The Menga-1 DNA study.
Right. There is a new DNA analysis published regarding the remains of a 45-year-old man found in an ancient tomb in Spain. The researchers named him Menga-1.
Extracting viable DNA from ancient remains in a warm climate like Spain is incredibly difficult.
Because of the heat?
Yeah, heat degrades genetic material very quickly. So just getting the sample is a triumph.
And the sample itself is fascinating. The analysis revealed that Menga-1 had a highly mixed genetic heritage. He wasn't just a product of a localized, isolated tribe. His DNA showed lineage from vast, disparate regions.
This is a critical piece of evidence that continues to fundamentally rewrite demographic history. For a very long time, the dominant historical narrative was that ancient societies were highly static.
You stayed where you were born.
Right. You were born in a small village, you farmed in that village, and you died in that village. But as we get better at sequencing ancient DNA, we are realizing that humanity has always been a highly mobile, deeply intertwined species.
People were migrating, trading, and mixing across massive continental distances thousands of years before the concept of borders or rigid ethnic identities even existed.
Exactly. Menga-1 is biological proof that human networks were vast and interconnected. The idea of the isolated ancient man is largely a myth.
We have always been travelers, and we have always relied on the Earth's resources to keep us moving. Which brings us to perhaps my favorite dispatch of the day.
Oh, the fool's gold.
Yes, we are digging into the Earth to find the materials to power our future, specifically for the green energy transition. We need lithium for electric vehicle batteries.
Tons of it.
But researchers at West Virginia University in the United States just found a massive hidden trove of lithium in the Appalachian Basin. And the twist is where they found it. They found it trapped inside pyrite.
Pyrite. Better known to anyone who has ever panned for gold as fool's gold.
Huh. Right. For centuries, miners cursed this rock. It was the ultimate disappointment. You thought you struck it rich, and it turned out to be useless, shiny garbage. And now, the researchers are saying this discarded rock might actually be the key to our green energy future.
The irony is rich, but the geological and economic implications are staggering. If we look at the mechanics of current lithium extraction, it is incredibly problematic.
So it's not very green, is it?
No, it's not. We rely heavily on massive evaporative brine pools in arid regions of South America, or highly destructive hard rock strip mining in places like Australia. Both methods require immense amounts of water and cause severe ecological degradation.
It is the great paradox of the electric vehicle movement. We are destroying local ecosystems to try and save the global climate. So how does finding lithium and fool's gold fix that?
It comes down to the chemical extraction process. The researchers at West Virginia University aren't proposing that we dig massive new strip mines to find pyrite.
So where does it come from?
The Appalachian Basin is already heavily scarred by centuries of coal and shale mining. The pyrite is sitting right there in the shale tailings, the leftover waste rock from previous mining operations.
So we wouldn't have to break new ground. We just sift through the trash we already dug up.
Exactly. And more importantly, the chemical structure of pyrite allows for a different kind of extraction. Instead of crushing and roasting the rock at extreme temperatures, which is highly carbon intensive, you can use chemical leaching.
Like using a chemical solvent to wash the lithium out of the rock. Almost like rinsing soap out of a sponge.
That is an excellent analogy. You are essentially dissolving the target mineral out of the host rock. If this process can be scaled industrially, it could revolutionize the battery supply chain.
It would be huge for the U.S.
It would allow the United States to source critical battery minerals domestically, reducing reliance on volatile international imports. And it would do so by economically revitalizing a region that has suffered heavily from the decline of the coal industry. Fool's gold is genuinely transforming into a modern energy treasure.
It is the ultimate redemption arc for a rock.
Truly.
But this perfectly pivots us into a really crucial discussion about the climate itself. We are scrambling to find lithium, to build batteries, to transition away from fossil fuels so we can stop global warming. But the Earth's climate system is not a passive machine.
Not at all.
It is a highly dynamic biological system, and as we push it, it pushes back in ways our legislation simply cannot predict.
The climate is full of complex feedback loops. Human inputs are only half the equation.
Right, and we just got a massive curveball from the ocean. Scientists have discovered a previously hidden source of ocean methane. They found specialized microbes thriving in nutrient-poor ocean waters that are actively producing methane, which is a greenhouse gas significantly more potent than carbon dioxide in the short term.
This is a classic biological feedback loop. For decades, our climate models have primarily focused on anthropogenic emissions, the gases humans pump out of smokestacks and tailpipes.
The stuff we can control.
Right. But as the oceans warm due to those human emissions, the biological activity within the ocean shifts. If warming waters accelerate the metabolic rate of these specific methanogenic microbes, they will pump out more methane,
Which traps more heat.
which warms the ocean further, causing them to pump out even more methane.
It's a runaway train, and it highlights how incredibly difficult it is to regulate the climate through human laws. Speaking of laws, there is a new study out of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, regarding the Montreal Protocol.
Ah, the ozone treaty.
Now, the Montreal Protocol, signed in 1987, is universally hailed as the most successful environmental treaty in human history, right? We all agreed to ban ozone-depleting substances, or ODS, to stop the hole in the ozone layer.
It was a triumph of international diplomacy and environmental science. But human legislation is inherently static, and industries are remarkably adaptive.
Because the MIT scientists just found a massive loophole. The treaty regulated the production of certain chemicals, but it left a loophole regarding specific unregulated emissions of other ozone-depleting substances that are used as intermediate chemicals in manufacturing.
They found a workaround.
Because of this loophole, industries just shifted their processes, and these emissions have spiked. MIT calculates that this loophole is going to delay the recovery of the ozone layer by a full 7 years.
It perfectly illustrates the friction between human policy and chemical reality. We banned the most obvious culprits like the CFCs and aerosol hairspray, but the industrial machine will always flow like water toward the path of least regulatory resistance.
It's a game of whack-a-mole.
When you combine that regulatory game of whack-a-mole with biological feedback loops like the ocean microbes, you realize how precarious our grasp on climate modeling really is.
And the feedback loops aren't just invisible gases. They're happening in our backyards, completely throwing the animal kingdom out of sync. There are new reports detailing how bees are emerging from their winter dormancy significantly earlier than ever before, directly due to milder winter temperatures.
This brings us to a concept known as phenological mismatch. Phenology is the study of cyclic and seasonal natural phenomena: when flowers bloom, when birds migrate, when insects hatch.
So unpack that mechanism for me, because if I'm listening to this and I have a vegetable garden, what does a bee waking up 2 weeks early actually mean for my tomato plants?
It is a systemic collapse of a synchronized ecosystem. For millions of years, the biological clocks of pollinators and flowering plants have evolved to respond to the same environmental cues.
They wake up together.
When the soil reaches a certain temperature, the flowers bloom. When the air reaches a certain temperature, the bees wake up from their dormancy to consume the nectar, inadvertently pollinating the flowers in the process. It is an exquisitely timed, mutually beneficial dance.
But the mild winters are breaking the clock.
Precisely. If a freakishly warm February causes the bees to break their dormancy and emerge, they wake up starving. But the wildflowers in your tomato plants might rely on sunlight hours, not just temperature, to bloom. So the bees are awake, but there are no flowers.
So the bees just starve to death.
The localized population crashes. And then, 3 weeks later, when the proper spring arrives and your tomatoes finally produce flowers, the pollinator population has been decimated. There is nothing to pollinate the crops.
Wow.
The phenological mismatch doesn't just threaten your backyard garden, it threatens the foundational baseline of global agriculture and biodiversity. The biological machinery is simply out of phase.
It is terrifyingly simple to understand, yet so catastrophic in its implications. But as we have seen throughout this dive, humans are nothing if not incredibly inventive when nature inconveniences us.
Which brings us to Beijing.
Which brings us to Beijing, China, and the Battle of the Fluff.
Ah, the catkins. This is a fascinating intersection of urban planning and high technology.
It really is. Every single spring, Beijing deals with what looks like a literal snowstorm, but it's actually millions of willow and poplar catkins.
The seed fluff.
These are fluffy seeds that blow through the streets, getting into everything and triggering severe respiratory allergies for millions of residents. Now, the blunt force historical solution would be to just break out the chainsaws and cut down all the female trees that produce the fluff.
But they can't do that.
Beijing isn't doing that because those specific trees provide absolutely vital soil and water conservation for the city. They need the trees, but they hate the fluff. So they are throwing an absurd amount of cutting-edge technology at the problem.
They have essentially militarized their forestry management.
Huh, they really have. The dispatches say they have deployed over 100 monitoring stations feeding data into AI-based forecasting models to predict exactly when and where the fluff will peak.
AI for tree seeds.
They have teams manually grafting male shoots onto the female trees to biologically alter their reproduction. And, my favorite part, they've deployed a new polymer flocculant to spray on the trees.
Flocculants are brilliant chemical tools.
Okay, break down the chemistry there, because polymer flocculant sounds like something from Star Trek. How does a chemical stop a tree from sneezing?
Flocculant is essentially a chemical binding agent. In water treatment, we use flocculants to make tiny particles of dirt clump together so they get heavy and sink to the bottom.
Okay, so making things heavy.
In the case of the Beijing trees, they are spraying a specialized polymer, a long chain of molecules, onto the catkins. The polymer alters the surface tension and electrostatic charge of the fluff. Instead of the tiny seeds separating and floating away on the breeze, the flocculant forces them to clump together into heavier masses that simply drop harmlessly to the ground.
So if I'm getting this right, we are deploying advanced artificial intelligence forecasting and cutting-edge molecular polymers just to wrangle tree seeds.
Yeah, when framed like that, it highlights the sheer complexity of modern problem solving. We refuse to compromise on the ecological benefits of the trees, so we use supercomputers in chemistry to manage their biological side effects.
It is a brilliant, slightly absurd use of technology, but it also serves as the perfect transition because we cannot talk about artificial intelligence managing trees without talking about how AI is currently infecting absolutely every single sector of human life and finance.
It's everywhere.
The AI boom is moving faster than anything we have ever seen, and it is oscillating wildly between the genuinely sublime and the completely ridiculous.
The hype cycle is reaching a fever pitch, and it is pulling massive amounts of global capital along with it.
Case in point, Allbirds, the sustainable footwear brand. They make very comfortable, eco-friendly sneakers out of wool. Well, they just announced they're pivoting to become an AI company.
Wool shoes to AI.
And the market reacted exactly how you would expect in a bubble. As a result of that single announcement, their stock skyrocketed 600%, adding $127 million to their market valuation practically overnight.
A wool shoe company became an AI company, and the market handed them over $100 million.
It is literally 1999 all over again. Remember the dot-com bubble? A company that sold pet food would just change their name to pets.com, add a web page, and suddenly Wall Street valued them at $1 billion. We have moved from adding .com to adding AI.
The financial mechanics of a hype cycle are incredibly predictable, but they're also deeply dangerous. Massive influxes of speculative capital mask the actual utility of a company. Investors aren't looking at the underlying balance sheets or asking how a shoe company intends to monetize neural networks.
They just don't want to miss out.
Right, they're just experiencing extreme FOMO, fear of missing out. The sheer velocity of the capital flow creates a massive bubble that is entirely disconnected from reality.
And the disconnect from reality isn't just happening in the stock market, it is happening in society. Because right alongside the Allbirds absurdity, we have this story out of South Korea regarding the runaway wolf.
The viral image.
Yes. A hyper-realistic image went wildly viral on social media, showing a massive, terrifying wolf sprinting through a populated city street in South Korea. It caused genuine, real-world panic. People were locking their doors, terrified to go outside. And of course, the image turned out to be entirely AI-generated.
This is the dark mirror to the financial bubble. On one hand, you have investors throwing millions of dollars at AI without understanding the technology. On the other hand, you have the general public consuming AI-generated media without possessing the digital literacy to question its authenticity.
They just believe it.
The speed at which algorithmic misinformation can trigger a physical, societal panic is going to be one of the defining security challenges of the next decade.
But I don't want to paint this entirely as a bubble of fake wolves in AI shoes, because the underlying technology is advancing at a terrifying functional speed. Let's look at the rapid integration of AI into enterprise systems. We have reports that Google is upgrading its Gemini image generation with a new architecture called the Nano Banana model.
It's moving so fast.
Canva, the design platform, just introduced an AI assistant that doesn't just answer questions, but autonomously calls various tools within the app to build your presentation.
Autonomous actions.
Over in India, a startup called Emergent launched an AI wingman designed to manage WhatsApp and Telegram interactions, and they hit $15 million in annual recurring revenue almost instantly. A marketing data company called HighTouch hit $100 million in revenue utilizing AI. And a learning app called Gizmo AI just secured $22 million after hitting 13 million users.
The sheer scale and speed of that adoption curve is unlike anything in the history of software. But there is a very specific technical thread connecting the Canva AI, the WhatsApp Wingman, and the other tools you mentioned. We are witnessing the fundamental shift from generative AI to agentic AI.
Agentic AI. I am seeing that term everywhere in these dispatches.
Yeah.
Explain the underlying mechanism there, because it sounds like a massive leap.
It is the difference between an encyclopedia and an executive assistant. Generative AI, like the early versions of ChatGPT, was reactive. You give it a text prompt, and it generates a text response. It's a very impressive parlor trick, but it is trapped in a chat box.
Right, it can't actually do anything.
Agentic AI, however, possesses agency. It is given a high-level goal, and it autonomously breaks that goal down into steps, writes its own code, and interacts with external software to achieve it.
So it's not just talking to you, it's pushing buttons on the internet.
Exactly, and the architecture allowing this is evolving rapidly. For instance, OpenAI recently released their Agents SDK with a native sandbox environment. This allows developers to build AI agents that can securely manage files, scrape the web, and execute software commands autonomously.
Give me a real-world example of that.
If you tell an agentic AI on WhatsApp to book my flights to Tokyo and reorganize my calendar, it doesn't just give you a list of links. It autonomously navigates the airline website, inputs your payment data, books the flight, opens your Google Calendar, and reschedules your meetings.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It executes complex logic loops across multiple application programming interfaces, or APIs, without any human intervention.
That is immense power. And it's not just software companies chasing it, it is a matter of sovereign national security. We have a dispatch noting that China has just doubled its AI for science supercomputing scale. They built a massive node in Zhengzhou, in the Henan province, utilizing 60,000 chips.
That's massive.
And the critical detail here is that they achieved this massive compute scale using absolutely no hardware from the United States.
That is a major geopolitical milestone. The U.S. has heavily restricted the export of advanced AI chips to China to try and maintain a technological bottleneck. The fact that China is successfully scaling massive 60,000 chip computing clusters using completely domestic hardware indicates that the sanctions are driving rapid internal innovation.
Arms race.
The race to control agentic AI is an arms race, and the global supply chains for the hardware are fracturing into isolated sovereign blocks.
Which brings us to the ethics of deploying all this autonomous power, because as the AI gets smarter, people are looking for ways to weaponize it in the information space. We have a report regarding a startup called Objection, which is backed by the billionaire Peter Thiel. Their explicitly stated goal is to use AI to systematically judge and challenge journalism.
The deployment of AI as an automated arbiter of truth is fraught with philosophical and ethical landmines.
The critics in the reports are sounding massive alarms over this. They argue that if you build an AI designed to instantly generate counter-narratives or flood the zone with algorithmic doubt, the second an investigative piece of journalism is published, it acts as a high-tech suppression tool. It could completely chill whistleblowers.
It shifts the asymmetry of power. Historically, a journalist publishes a well-researched piece, and a corporation has to hire lawyers and PR firms to painstakingly refute it.
It takes time and money.
But if a corporation can deploy a fleet of AI agents to instantly scrutinize, challenge, and muddy the waters around any negative reporting, it isn't necessarily seeking truth. It is deploying an automated defense mechanism against accountability. The fundamental flaw in using AI to judge the news is that an AI is only as unbiased as the human beings who coded its parameters and curated its training data. Who judges the bias of the algorithm?
Exactly. It's an automated information war.
Right.
But we do have instances of companies actively resisting that path. Anthropic, which is one of the premier AI research labs, just shrugged off venture capital funding offers that would have valued the company at an astronomical $800 billion.
Turning down that much money is rare.
And they have a track record of this. They previously rejected a lucrative request from the United States Department of Defense to use their AI technology for surveillance purposes.
Anthropic's entire corporate identity is built around the concept of constitutional AI. They're attempting to hard-code ethical boundaries and behavioral constraints directly into the neural network's architecture, rather than just adding safety filters as an afterthought.
Building the ethics in from the ground up.
By rejecting military surveillance contracts and turning down hyper-inflated valuations, they are trying to signal to the market that they will not sacrifice those constitutional parameters for rapid monetization. But in an ecosystem where companies are adding $100 million in value just by whispering the letters AI, the pressure from shareholders to compromise those ethics will be immense.
The friction between ethics and hypercapitalism is palpable. And speaking of complex biological machines, before we let the AI executive assistants completely take over the world, I think we need to talk about the biological hardware we are all currently operating.
Our bodies.
The human body. Because the medical dispatches today show that we are still fundamentally misunderstanding how to optimize our own health, and the medical industry is still prone to making some massive, sometimes fatal, missteps.
We have a profound tendency to treat the human body like a standardized mechanical engine. If a part is broken, you replace it. If the pressure is too high, you turn a valve. But human physiology is a highly localized circadian ecosystem.
Let's dive into that circadian aspect because there is fascinating new research regarding exercise and blood sugar. For decades, the generic fitness advice has been, you have to work out first thing in the morning to optimize your metabolism.
Right, the early bird gets the worm.
But new research completely shatters that standardization. It shows that the absolute best time of day to exercise to control your blood sugar depends entirely on your chronotype.
Your chronotype refers to your natural genetic predisposition for sleep and wakefulness, whether you are biologically wired to be an early bird or a night owl.
Right. And the data shows that if you are a night owl, forcing yourself to do a brutal, high-intensity workout at 6 in the morning doesn't actually optimize your hormonal regulation. In fact, it might be counterproductive.
To understand the mechanism, you have to look at endocrinology. When you wake up, your body releases a spike of cortisol, a stress hormone, to get you moving. In early birds, this spike aligns perfectly with morning light, and their insulin sensitivity is primed.
So morning workouts work for them.
If they exercise then, their muscles efficiently pull glucose out of their bloodstream. But in a night owl, that metabolic machinery peaks much later in the afternoon or evening. If a night owl forces a morning workout, they are fighting their own hormonal tide. Their body isn't primed to process the blood sugar efficiently.
So what should they do?
By simply shifting their exercise to the evening, aligning the physical stress with their natural biological peak, their insulin regulation drastically improves. It is a powerful reminder that personalized medicine isn't just about genetics, it's about timing.
We have to sync our actions to our internal clocks. And speaking of vital health metrics, there is a massive update regarding cardiovascular health standards. The new medical consensus dictates that systolic blood pressure, which is the top number on your reading, must be kept strictly below 120 millimeters of mercury to effectively reduce the risks of stroke and heart attacks.
This is a very significant tightening of the medical guidelines. For a long time, particularly in older adults, physicians were comfortable letting that systolic number creep up to 130 or even 140, assuming it was just a natural symptom of aging.
But the new data says that leeway is deadly. Why is that specific threshold of 120 so critical? What is physically happening inside the veins?
It is a matter of mechanical wear and tear on the vascular system. The systolic pressure is the sheer physical force of the blood slamming against walls of your arteries every time your heart beats. Your arteries are lined with a delicate layer of cells called the endothelium. When that pressure constantly exceeds 120, the sheer mechanical stress begins to create microscopic tears in the endothelial wall.
And the body tries to patch those tears.
Exactly. The body responds to those microtears with an inflammatory response, rushing cholesterol and cellular debris to patch the damage. Over decades, those patches harden into plaque.
Ah, I see where this is going.
The plaque narrows the artery, which increases the pressure further, causing more tears. Eventually, the plaque ruptures, causing a blood clot that travels to the brain for a stroke or blocks the coronary artery for a heart attack. By aggressively keeping the pressure below 120, you prevent the initial micro-tears from ever forming. It is a profound shift toward aggressive preventative maintenance.
But aggressive medical intervention comes with its own massive risks, and the reports today highlight the deep friction within the pharmaceutical industry.
Let's look at the Alzheimer's drug.
The expensive one. There is a highly touted, newly developed drug for Alzheimer's disease that costs an astonishing £90,000. Yet, recent clinical reviews have shown that it is highly unlikely to provide any actual substantive benefit to the patient's daily quality of life.
This is a tragic illustration of the disconnect between treating a biomarker and treating a human being. The FDA and pharmaceutical companies often fast-track drugs that successfully target a specific biological mechanism. In the case of this Alzheimer's drug, it is highly effective at clearing a specific protein, called amyloid plaque, from the brain. In a laboratory setting, it does exactly what it is designed to do.
But clearing the plaque doesn't stop the patient from losing their memory.
Precisely. The clinical reality is that clearing the plaque does not reverse the cognitive decline or restore the patient's ability to recognize their family or live independently. We rushed a 90,000-pound chemical tool to market that fixes the X-ray, so to speak, but fails to heal the patient.
And the consequences of rushing chemical tools can be fatal. Another major study released today linked common medications used to treat IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, to a significantly higher risk of overall mortality. People taking these drugs to manage stomach discomfort are inadvertently increasing their risk of premature death.
It highlights the agonizing friction in medical science. Patients suffering from chronic, debilitating conditions like IBS are desperate for relief. Pharmaceutical companies are deeply incentivized to provide that relief. But biological systems are vastly more complex than simple cause and effect equations.
It's not just a plumbing issue.
A drug might successfully paralyze the nerve endings in the gut to stop cramping, providing short-term relief. But over a decade of use, that systemic suppression alters the microbiome, affects nutrient absorption, and degrades the immune system, leading to higher mortality. You cannot rush epidemiological data. It takes decades of observation to understand the true cost of chemical intervention.
The muddy waters of medicine. We want a clear, binary answer, a magic pill, but the reality requires patience and a deep respect for the complexity of the system.
A respect we often lack until the data forces us to acknowledge it.
Well, speaking of vastly complex systems full of deep, often violent friction, we need to transition to the macro level. We are going to unpack the geopolitical currents and global economic shifts detailed in today's journalistic dispatches.
This is where it all collides.
Looking across all these different geopolitical reports today, what strikes me isn't a narrative of who is historically right or wrong, but the sheer, inescapable economic domino effect that all these global conflicts share. Let's start in the Middle East, specifically regarding the ongoing tensions between Iran and the United States.
The Strait of Hormuz.
The dispatches confirm that the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz is now fully implemented. In direct response to this economic strangulation, Iran's military is openly threatening to disrupt international shipping routes in the Red Sea. In the midst of this, a U.S. strike on a Pacific vessel resulted in the deaths of 3 individuals accused of narco-trafficking.
Tensions are incredibly high.
And tying this incredibly grounded terrestrial conflict back to our earlier discussions, the U.S. Space Force chief issued a statement explicitly noting that space combat was now critical to mission success for U.S. operations regarding Iran.
The integration of the Space Force highlights how modern warfare relies entirely on orbital infrastructure. The intelligence, the drone targeting, the encrypted communications, it all bounces through the satellites in low Earth orbit. A blockade in the Middle East requires an absolute dominance of the space domain above it.
Yet, despite the military posturing, the diplomatic channels are desperately trying to remain open. Pakistani mediators, led by their army chief, General Asim Munir, are currently on the ground in Tehran, Iran. Reports indicate that the United States and Iran are actively weighing a 2-week extension to a temporary ceasefire to allow for further technical and diplomatic discussions.
They're trying to buy time.
Now, looking at the geography here, when you realize that the Strait of Hormuz is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, it suddenly makes absolute sense why a blockade there instantly chokes off the global economy.
The Strait of Hormuz is arguably the most vital choke point on the planet. A massive percentage of the world's seaborne crude oil and liquefied natural gas must squeeze through that tiny 21-mile gap between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman.
That is a tiny bottleneck.
When the U.S. blockades Iranian ports there, and Iran counter-threatens the Red Sea, which feeds directly into the Suez Canal, you are effectively applying a tourniquet to the dual arteries of global energy and Asian-European trade.
And we are seeing the physical reality of that tourniquet right now in the economic reports. The UK government is reportedly preparing the public for a summer of shortages, specifically warning about massive disruptions to the food supply chain because container ships are trapped or being rerouted around Africa.
Supply chains are breaking.
A major European energy executive issued a stark warning that Europe currently has maybe 6 weeks of jet fuel left in reserve. But here is the paradox that absolutely scrambles my brain. We have military blockades, we have UK food shortage warnings, we have Europe running out of jet fuel. Yet, if you look at the financial markets, the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, and the Nasdaq are all hitting absolute record highs.
The war windfall.
The financial reports refer to this as a war windfall driven by technology stocks and massive corporate price hikes. And on top of that, China just reported that their GDP grew by a surprising 5% despite all this global chaos. How is the stock market booming while the physical supply chain is bleeding out?
It is a bizarre, seemingly psychotic disconnect, but it operates on a very cold, mechanical logic. The crucial thing to remember is that the stock market is not a measure of societal well-being or supply chain health. It is purely a measure of corporate profitability and investor sentiment.
So chaos is profitable.
Highly profitable. Consider the mechanics of a supply shock. When the Red Sea is threatened, the cost of shipping a container goes through the roof. Corporations immediately pass that cost onto the consumer by raising prices. However, many massive corporations use the cover of global inflation to raise their prices significantly higher than their actual costs increase.
They've had the margins.
This expands their profit margins drastically. That is the war windfall. Furthermore, in times of global instability, governments pour hundreds of billions of dollars into defense contracting, aerospace, and domestic tech manufacturing, like the AI chips we discussed earlier. Investors see these record-breaking corporate profit margins, they see the massive government defense spending, and they buy the stocks, driving the indices to record highs.
So the market celebrates the scarcity because the corporations own the scarce resources. But that feels like a house of cards.
It is incredibly fragile, because beneath those record stock highs, the physical reality is bleak. The reports note that debt alarms are ringing globally. Governments are taking on massive amounts of national debt to subsidize the skyrocketing costs of energy and food for their citizens to prevent civil unrest. You have a euphoric, booming stock market floating directly on top of a fragile, fractured physical supply chain and soaring sovereign debt. It is an unsustainable macroeconomic dichotomy.
And the friction driving that dichotomy is accelerating across multiple continents. Let's look at the dispatches from Eastern Europe. The Ukraine-Russia war is showing signs of severe escalation. Recent reports detail a massive wave of Russian drone and missile strikes devastating Ukrainian cities, including Kyiv, Odessa, and Dnipro, resulting in the deaths of at least 15 to 16 people, including children.
It's devastating.
In direct response to the bombardment, European leaders are actively promising to inject more military and financial aid into Kyiv. And crucially, the West is rapidly ramping up its own domestic drone manufacturing capabilities. This industrial shift prompted Moscow to issue a stark warning that European drone manufacturing companies are now considered potential targets.
The emphasis on drone manufacturing represents a fundamental restructuring of the European defense industrial base. We have moved past the era of relying solely on massive, expensive fighter jets.
It's all about swarms now.
The conflict in Ukraine has proven that cheap, mass-produced, highly autonomous drones can paralyze traditional armored columns and devastate infrastructure. By decentralizing and rapidly scaling drone production across Europe, the West is changing the economic arithmetic of the war, which triggers the expanded threat envelope from Russia targeting the supply chains themselves.
It's the industrialization of asymmetric warfare. And speaking of devastating asymmetric warfare, we must look at the flashpoints on the African continent, which the dispatches note are frequently overshadowed by the headlines in Europe and the Middle East.
The situation in Sudan.
The nation of Sudan is now entering its 4th year of a brutal civil war between the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SF, and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. International aid officials are openly lamenting it as an abandoned crisis, with grim reports estimating that half of the nation's population is currently facing severe starvation.
The logistics of delivering humanitarian aid in Sudan have almost entirely collapsed amidst the fighting. It is a catastrophic failure of international intervention, where the geopolitical focus and capital are tied up in the Middle East, leaving the Sudanese population entirely exposed to a grueling war of attrition over resources and territorial control.
But right alongside that horror, we have a fascinating example of diplomatic soft power in neighboring Cameroon. The country has been dealing with a severe, localized separatist conflict. But Pope Leo XIV recently traveled to Cameroon, visiting the cities of Yaoundé and Bamenda, which is the epicenter of the separatist violence.
And it had an immediate effect.
The mere presence of the Pope prompted the armed separatist groups to announce a unilateral 3-day pause in fighting. During his visit, the Pope delivered a blistering public rebuke, blasting corrupt tyrants who spend billions on warfare while their civilian populations suffer.
It's a striking demonstration of the enduring influence of religious and moral institutions in the modern geopolitical arena. A 3-day pause does not solve the underlying political grievances of the separatists in Bamenda, but it proves that asymmetric armed groups are still sensitive to global optics and the soft power wielded by a figure like the Pope. It provides a highly visible, albeit temporary, disruption to the momentum of the violence.
To round out our geopolitical overview, we have 2 brief dispatches highlighting how internal national media landscapes are shifting under financial and political pressures. In Hungary, the incoming Prime Minister, Peter Magyar, who recently secured a decisive electoral victory, has publicly vowed to suspend the nation's state media operations.
He called it a propaganda machine.
Right. He characterized the existing state media infrastructure as a propaganda machine that needs to be completely overhauled. Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, announced it is cutting almost 10% of its total staff. The goal is to save £500 million as the legacy broadcaster struggles with immense financial strains and a population that is rapidly changing its viewing habits toward digital streaming.
Both of those dispatches, while vastly different in context, point to the same structural vulnerability. In Hungary, it is a political reckoning over who controls the narrative apparatus of the state. In the UK, it is a technological and financial reckoning for the institution of public broadcasting in the era of decentralized internet media. The centralized control of information, whether by state decree or legacy prestige, is eroding.
It is all connected in the muddy waters. We have covered an absolutely massive expanse of human endeavor today. We started by looking at a map tracing the invisible skeleton of 40 million galaxies, and we discussed a comet from an alien star system spraying water into the void.
We really went everywhere.
We dug into the dirt to find a Cold War bunker hiding under a medieval castle, and we talked about the chemical mechanics of washing lithium out of fool's gold to power our cars. We laughed at the absolute absurdity of an all-birds shoe company pivoting to AI, but we also look at the very serious autonomous power of agentic AI networks managing our lives.
And the geopolitical fallout.
And we grappled with the incredibly heavy realities of medical missteps, global blockades choking the Red Sea, the paradox of a booming stock market amid supply chain collapse, and the devastating realities of warfare stretching from Eastern Europe to Sudan.
It is an immense amount of data to synthesize. But if there's one core insight to draw from all these disparate threads, it is the stark contrast between our technological capability and our biological reality. We possess the engineering prowess to capture a tumbling piece of rogue space debris in Earth orbit. We have the computational power to forecast the trajectory of tree pollen using artificial intelligence.
We can mathematically trace the expansion of the universe itself.
Yet, despite this godlike technological leverage, we remain profoundly vulnerable to the geopolitical, economic, and biological feedback loops right here in our own backyards. The tools we build are getting infinitely smarter and more autonomous, but the fundamental human challenge is how we share scarce resources, how we resolve ideological conflicts, and how we manage the delicate balance of our environment remain exactly the same as they were when we were building stone castles.
The tools change, but human nature simply doesn't. And so, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought as you step away from this deep dive and go about the rest of your day. We constantly seek clear binary answers, the clean X-ray, the magic pill, the simple political solution, but as you look at the world around you, consider how the massive, invisible macro forces we discussed directly impact the intimate micro details of your life.
It all trickles down.
Whether it is the DARP energy expanding the fabric of the universe above you, or a microscopic organism pumping methane into the ocean, or a 21-mile-wide trade route closing halfway across the planet, it all ripples down. It impacts the price of the tomatoes in your garden, the cost of the fuel you put in your car, and the very air you breathe. It is a single, deeply intertwined system, and there's immense power in finally seeing the connections in those muddy waters. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Stay curious, keep questioning the world around you, and we will catch you next time.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.
Welcome to the debate. When structural engineers want to test a new skyscraper's resilience, they don't just look at the blueprints.
Right. They put it on a shake table.
Exactly. They put a scale model on a massive shake table, and they simulate a violent earthquake to see exactly how the building absorbs kinetic energy.
And, if the skyscraper sways dramatically, but the core holds, half the engineers celebrate it as a triumph of modern, flexible design.
Yeah, but the other half are down in the basement with magnifying glasses, right?
Exactly.
Looking at the microfractures forming in the concrete foundation, warning everyone that the structural integrity is quietly compromised, and the very next tremor will bring the entire edifice down.
Right. And right now, our global economy is sitting on that massive shake table. We are experiencing overlapping, intense geopolitical shocks that are testing the very foundation of how human civilization sustains itself.
And those shocks, they are not abstract. We're watching a fully implemented United States naval blockade of Iranian ports, which directly threatens the Strait of Hormuz and Red Sea shipping lanes.
Not to mention the tragic entry into the 4th year of the civil war in Sudan.
Right, and escalating long-range drone strikes between Russia and Ukraine extending deeper into civilian energy infrastructure. The tremors are literally everywhere.
Yet, paradoxically, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ are hitting record highs. China's economy has just reported an unexpected 5% growth rate for the first quarter.
Yeah, it's wild.
It is. And that tension between those two realities is exactly what we need to unpack today. So the central question we are exploring is this. Does the current resilience of global markets and rapid strategic adaptation signal a robust, successful transition to a new multipolar economy?
Or are these positive indicators merely, short-term, debt-fueled illusions that are masking an impending systemic crisis of supply chain collapse and geopolitical fragmentation?
Exactly. And I take the position that the planetary economy is demonstrating remarkable structural resilience, actively and successfully adapting to a multipolar reality through new trade alliances and rapid energy transitions.
And I come at it from a different way. I take the position that this apparent macroeconomic stability is a highly dangerous mirage. It is sustained by emergency national debt, and it actively ignores acute physical supply chain vulnerabilities, as well as a terrifying breakdown of the international norms that govern how nations interact.
Let's start by looking at how the global system is absorbing these shocks, because the efficiency is really unlike anything we have seen in modern history. Wall Street's record highs are not just irrational exuberance or sentiment-driven day trading.
I don't know about that.
Well, when you look at the underlying mechanisms, these highs are backed by robust bank earnings. Banks are successfully pricing in this geopolitical volatility and restructuring corporate debt to find legitimate pathways to growth.
But capital is
flowing and businesses are forecasting accurately. Look at China's unexpected 5% GDP growth in the first quarter.
Right.
That isn't just a statistical anomaly. That growth is being driven by targeted infrastructure investments and robust exports, which proves that major planetary economies possess the internal momentum to weather regional conflicts.
I hear what you're saying, but let me jump in here. The issue with looking purely at capital flow is that data is weightless.
What do you mean?
You can't print wheat. You cannot digitally download jet fuel. The market highs you're pointing to are dangerously detached from the physical realities of moving thousands of tons of material across contested oceans.
Okay, but the physical trade routes are adapting too. Russia has doubled its wheat exports to Sudan, reaching 1.7 million tons. They now capture 40% of the African grain market. We are shifting away from a unipolar hegemony.
Yeah, but at what cost?
Well, it means a world where the United States essentially no longer dictates the rules and routes of global trade, moving toward a decentralized network. Much like the Internet's TCP/IP protocol, if one node or route goes down, the cargo simply finds a new efficient path. Trade is finding a new resilient equilibrium.
But when you look closely at how governments are managing these overlapping crises, you see a pattern of knee-jerk, emergency fiscal spending to temporarily stabilize their economies.
You think it's just a Band-Aid?
Absolutely. Governments are issuing bonds and printing money to subsidize energy costs for their citizens. This triggers massive debt alarms globally, and it masks structural deficits. We are staring at the specter of widespread economic turmoil, because sovereign debt cannot expand infinitely to paper over the fact that physical goods are becoming exponentially harder to acquire.
So you view the financial metrics as completely disconnected from the physical scarcity?
Entirely. The markets are ignoring acute physical shortages. Let's ground this in reality. Europe currently has only about 6 weeks of jet fuel left.
Wow, 6 weeks.
Just 6 weeks. And the United Kingdom is actively preparing for a summer of shortages in basic food supplies directly linked to the conflict in Iran and the ensuing maritime disruptions.
Right.
When I read that Europe has 6 weeks of jet fuel left, my first thought isn't about macroeconomic theory. It's about whether supply chains for vital medical imports will function, or if anyone is going to be able to fly for business or family reasons. We have to face the fact that the U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, a physical choke point that handles roughly 20% of the world's oil, and Iran's reciprocal threats to Gulf shipping, these represent existential threats to planetary stability. A stock rally fueled by debt simply cannot fix a broken physical logistics network.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. It's like a forest fire clearing dead brush, right? The conflict forces economic efficiency. If this were a true systemic crisis, wouldn't we see a collapse in these forward-looking tech investments rather than just a concentration of profits?
No, because
Look, that physical fragmentation you're worried about is exactly what is driving the massive capital reallocation we are seeing on Wall Street right now. If the global economy were truly on the brink of systemic, terminal collapse, capital would flee to traditional safe havens like gold or treasury bonds.
But it is fleeing.
Instead, capital is aggressively funding solutions to bypass the exact physical bottlenecks you just mentioned. Look at the transportation sector. Glideways just secured $170 million in funding for autonomous transit networks. Look at the artificial intelligence space. Anthropic recently shrugged off venture capital offers that value the company at over $800 billion.
But how does an $800 billion valuation for an AI software company put food on the shelves in the UK or fuel in European airplanes?
Because investors recognize that artificial intelligence is the ultimate optimization engine for a fractured physical world. The valuation matters because it reflects a massive bet that AI will optimize these broken supply chains.
Optimizing a blocked route doesn't unblock the route. But if the Red Sea is blocked, an algorithmic logistics system recalculates rail, road, and alternative maritime routes in milliseconds, predicting weather, port congestion, and fuel prices far more effectively than human dispatchers ever could. The capital isn't fleeing reality, it is financing the tools needed to route around physical blockages. Investors are betting that the foundational infrastructure of our economy, data, electricity, human talent, will persist and evolve. I think you are misinterpreting what that capital flow actually represents. The indices are being propped up not just by visionary tech investments optimizing supply chains, but by acute corporate opportunism.
Opportunism?
Yeah, we are seeing reports of massive war windfalls from major oil companies right now. What is actually happening is that corporations are extending their record profit runs by utilizing geopolitical instability as a convenient cover to raise prices on consumers. It's a localized extraction of wealth. They see a crisis in the Middle East, and they use it to mask baseline inflation, passing the cost aggressively down the line. When you see the S&P 500 rising, you aren't looking at a planetary system innovating its way out of a crisis.
You don't think so?
No, you are looking at a concentration of profits at the very top of the supply chain, while the consumer base is being completely hollowed out. And regarding AI, companies aren't investing in algorithms just to optimize shipping routes. They are investing in AI so they can fire large swaths of their workforce to maintain their profit margins when physical shipping becomes too expensive to operate.
But wait, you're looking at corporate profits as a symptom of a disease, when in a macro sense, they operate as the antibodies.
It is a painful adjustment, yes, but those elevated prices force absolute economic efficiency. If oil is cheap, nobody innovates.
That's a very clinical way to look at human suffering.
But the conflict in the Middle East and the resulting price pressures are acting as a catalyst. This brings us directly to how nations are literally rewiring global energy supply chains in real time.
And that rewiring is not going smoothly at all. Geopolitical analyst Tom Luongo recently assessed the implications of the strategy pushed by former President Trump to rewire global oil away from the Strait of Hormuz and instead rely more heavily on the Gulf of Mexico.
Right, diversifying the source.
But Luongo estimates this could drop OPEC production by 25%. Do you realize what a 25% drop in OPEC production means to the physical functioning of civilization?
It forces a transition.
Taking 1/5 of the world's oil off the market isn't a catalyst for efficiency. It is a recipe for unprecedented shocks. It heavily penalizes European nations that are already cut off from Russian supplies due to the Ukraine conflict. You cannot run a continent's manufacturing base on autonomous transit software.
Fair point, but
The physical inputs required to sustain human life, food, fuel, fertilizer, they are acutely vulnerable right now.
that's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. I don't deny the physical pressure on Europe, but let's look at how the broader system responds to that exact pressure. Doesn't the fact that China condemns the U.S. blockade while simultaneously accelerating domestic hydrogen development show the planetary system self-correcting?
I wouldn't call it self-correcting.
Well, the National Energy Administration in China is fast-tracking their entire hydrogen strategy to the scale-up phase, precisely because of these Middle East energy security concerns. The blockade is acting as a forcing function for global decarbonization.
A forcing function implies a controlled, deliberate reaction. What we are witnessing on the ground is panic. Yes, China is pushing hydrogen, but let's talk about the physical constraints of that mechanism.
It's scaling rapidly. Transitioning an industrial base of over 1 billion people to hydrogen takes decades of physical infrastructure development. You have to build pressurized pipelines, massive electrolysis plants that require immense amounts of fresh water and electricity, and entirely new storage facilities.
But the investments are happening now.
It is not a software update. It is not a short-term patch for an immediate drop in oil availability. If shipping halts today, a hydrogen plant scheduled for completion in 2035 offers zero relief.
It may take time, but the reallocation of resources begins immediately, which shifts long-term geopolitical leverage. And I think you are underestimating how these adaptations are fundamentally reshaping diplomacy and governance across the entire planet, particularly outside the Western sphere.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. But go ahead, finish your point. Thank you. The global South is taking agency in ways we haven't seen in a century. They are building their own redundancy. Look at the diplomatic maneuvers happening right now. We have Pakistan's army chief in Tehran actively mediating peace talks between the United States and Iran.
Right.
That is a massive shift in diplomatic gravity. In Latin America, Brazilian lawmakers are pushing for state-owned development of critical minerals, deliberately balancing U.S. and Chinese interests to secure their own economic sovereignty. Furthermore, we see Peru successfully navigating its democratic processes amid a tense runoff between Roberto Sanchez and Keiko Fujimori.
Okay, but
These are empirical examples of the world finding localized, effective solutions without relying on a unipolar hegemon to dictate the terms of engagement.
yeah, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. What you are describing as localized effective solutions is actually a dangerous fragmentation, leading us directly into a world without rules.
Without rules.
Yes, when the unipolar order recedes without a structured, agreed-upon framework to replace it, you don't get harmonious multipolarity. You get impunity. State and non-state actors realize that the traditional global policemen are distracted, and they act accordingly. Look at the military realities on the ground in the Middle East. We have reports that the U.S. military depleted its entire stock of untested precision strike missiles in a single attack on Iran.
But doesn't the depletion of those missiles suggest that the old way of maintaining order through overwhelming military force is becoming obsolete, forcing a pivot to diplomacy?
No, it suggests desperation, and it emboldens bad actors. Look at Sudan, which you mentioned earlier. It is a forgotten crisis. The international donor conferences in Berlin yield financial pledges, but absolutely zero peace. The warring factions didn't even bother to show up to the negotiating table. Why?
Because the structure is changing.
Because in this new fragmented world you are celebrating, regional warlords know that the international community is too divided to hold them accountable. The multipolar shift isn't empowering the global south, it's empowering warlords to act with absolute impunity.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you see a breakdown of rules, whereas I see a localization of responsibility. Help me reconcile your view of total impunity with what is happening in Cameroon right now.
Cameroon?
Yeah. Pope Leo XIV is visiting the country, and the Unity Alliance, a local separatist coalition, declared a temporary 3-day ceasefire specifically for his visit. Doesn't this prove that non-state and regional actors possess their own highly effective mechanisms for de-escalation, independent of global superpowers?
A 3-day pause in a brutal conflict for a papal visit is a beautiful human moment. It shows that shared cultural reverence still exists. But a religious pause is not a structural substitute for international law. The war resumed on day 4. We have to differentiate between temporary, localized pauses and systemic resilience.
But if the Strait of Hormuz is permanently compromised, the economic incentive to commercialize alternative trade routes and energy sources skyrockets overnight. The system dynamically reallocates.
But the human cost of that transition is staggering. The top tier is floating away on a cloud of AI valuations, while the physical economy that 99% of humanity relies on is fracturing under the weight of resource wars.
Well, we are arriving at a crucial point of synthesis here. From my perspective, despite the turbulence, the empirical data tells a story of adaptation. We see China maintaining growth, markets funding logistics, and the global south asserting diplomatic agency.
And to synthesize my perspective, the current optimism is a dangerous veneer. It masks a debt-ridden system unequipped for physical shortages. The weaponization of supply chains represents a systemic risk that no tech innovation can paper over.
We clearly have an area of continued disagreement on whether these market highs reflect true adaptation or a fragile illusion. But I think we have a point of convergence. The old unipolar, US-centric order is definitively over.
I agree entirely. The unipolar moment has passed. How we survive this transition is the defining variable of our time.
And there is certainly much more to explore in these ongoing multi-front diplomatic efforts. As we look at the global economy, we have to ask ourselves again about that skyscraper on the shake table. Are we marveling at the flexibility of the steel, or are we ignoring the microfractures in the concrete? We'll leave it to you to weigh the evidence and form your own conclusion. Thank you for joining us.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.